In our previous video, we started working on a CRUD system, a system that would essentially let us create, read, update, and delete colors. In that previous video, we put together a page I called Index. This index page essentially gave us a list of all the different colors that we currently have available in our colors file. We had a little bit of CSS in there to jazz it up, make it look a little bit nicer, and I put some placeholding links in to be there for us when we were ready to take the next step. In this video, I do want to go ahead and take one of those next steps, and I want to start putting together the actual show page. The idea behind the show page is that this should be the page that the user goes to when they click on one of the colors on the main page, the index page, and when they click on it, they should be taken to a page called Show, which I've already started. Here's the code for it right here. It's essentially just an empty page with our CSS all set up in it. And when they go to that show page, what I'd like for the user to be shown at that point is essentially the same information about the colors that they're already seeing on the index page, except that would then give us a potential place for future growth. If we were to add additional data to the colors that we are storing in our file, instead of trying to find and make room for that information here on the index page, which would very quickly get crowded with a very complicated table, we could instead take all of the non-essential, non-critical, non-core attributes of our colors, and we could have those set up to show on the show page instead of on the index page itself. So to get started with this, I already have a hyperlink in here. I have it set up so that when the user clicks on the actual color box itself, right now it's just a dummy URL, #show. What I'd like to do is I'd like to have that actually go over to my show page, which I've called show.php. If I jump back to my browser and give that a try, when I click on it, it takes me over to my show page. There's nothing on the show page really right now other than just the basic setup of our document, but it does get us to the right spot. First trick we have with this show page is how does the show page know which color it is supposed to show? In the old-fashioned HTML world, I would have the option of potentially going through and creating a separate show page for every color. But here in a dynamic system like the one that we're creating, that is not really an option. What we need is we need a single show page that has the ability to dynamically create itself, containing the proper information about a color. And it needs to have a way to be able to determine which color it is that it's actually supposed to show. So the idea is when I click on the rattlesnake color, over on the show page, I should see the details about the rattlesnake color. When I click on the three-color black color, then over on the show page, it should show the details about the three-color black color. So I need some way to have the show page be informed of which link was clicked on the index page. One way that I could do that, probably the best way that I could do that, would be to set up the hyperlinks on the index page so that whenever the user clicks them, it passes some crucial detail about the color, which can then be received as a get parameter on the show page to be used to retrieve the proper color from the color file. So then the question becomes, what parameter do we pass? I could, for example, pass the color code right here. The only issue I can think of with that is that we haven't really defined whether those color codes are going to be unique or not. Will it be possible when we get to the end of this system that there may be multiple colors of the same shade of orange, for example? I don't know right now. I haven't really thought it through. More or less, this is just a silly example, so I haven't examined it to that level of depth. But I can tell you that even if there's the chance that there might be more than one color with the same code, we probably don't want to go that direction. What would be better instead is if we had some type of unique value, some kind of unique identifier for each one of our individual colors. And it might even be potentially better if we had it set up to where that value, that unique identifier, was something that the user probably never really saw, and something certainly that the user would never have the ability to change. That's another issue with the color code itself, is that when we set up our edit page, the user will be able to change those. So here I need to put together something that is unchangeable, unmutable, we might say, and something that is unique and unambiguous. What I'm thinking is, how about we set up a ID system? Basically, we could set up each of our colors so that we're able to give it some sort of ID, and we set it up so that every color has an ID. No IDs are shared between colors. Every color has its very own unique ID that never changes. So over in my actual colors file, what I'm thinking is an extra piece of data that's added here. So maybe we set them up where each one of them has as its first field some unique ID number. Let me go ahead and fill the rest of these in. There we go. With each of my colors, I now have an ID as its first field, and I've separated the ID from all the other pieces of data with a tab. So the ID, just like the color's name, its red value, green value, and blue value, are tab delimited, just like everything else. Let's go see what kind of effect that has on my index page now that I've added that additional field. If we take a look here in the browser, if I hit refresh, ooh, things have gone kind of sideways, not very good. I've lost all the actual colors themselves. The ID is being shown where the color's name should be. Where the color's code should be, I'm seeing the color's name plus part of the code. Essentially, everything's been sort of thrown off by one. If I go back to the code for my index page, if we come back up here to the top and take a look, we'll get a little bit of an idea of why that's happening. You might remember the way we set this up was we were using fget.csv to pull out all of the tab-separated fields from our file and to then push them into an array here called colors. When I came down in the body then to actually make use of those different values, when I wanted the color's name, for example, I referred to the field with the name in it as field 0. Well, the trick is field 0 is no longer the name. Field 0 is now the ID number, so this would now need to be field 1. I would also need to go back then and change the actual field numbers of where the color codes are. So the red value is no longer in 1, it's now in 2. The green value is no longer in 2, it's now in 3. I'm essentially going to have to shift everything over. Is there the chance that this might happen again in the future? Yes, there's very much the chance, the very real chance that that could happen. So that's something that I might want to think about. I'm also not overly crazy about the way that I'm using these index numbers down in the actual body. When we just have 4 fields, it's not that bad to keep track of, although you'd have to admit that somebody who wasn't as familiar with this code as we are would not be able to immediately look at these bits of code and understand what it is that we're actually displaying in these different parts of the table. So I think there's a change we could make that will make things easier for us to update in the future and make our code more readable. What I'd like to do is back up here in the index page where I had read my colors. What I'd like to do up here is, instead of simply taking those fields and pushing them into my array, I would actually like to take those fields and convert them into an associative array. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to make a new array here called color, singular color, and then into the color array what I want to do is I want to define keys for each one of the different aspects of the data that we're pulling out of the file. So I'll say for color element name, put the value from fields 1 right there. Let me go ahead and do that for the rest of the fields as well, like this. So the value from field 1, which is actually the second field in the file, will now be referred to as name. Field 2 will be called red, 3 will be green, 4 will be blue. This also then gives me an easy way to take care of that new field, which is the ID, and that's that I could just say field 0 is the ID. So now I have this new color array, and what I could do with that is I could take that color array and I could push that into my colors, plural, array instead of the fields array. So I've essentially just sort of translated one array into a different array. Instead of using a numerically indexed array as the inner value arrays of my colors array, I'm now using an associative array there in its place. The benefit of that now, the readability and the ease of updating it in the future, will be that down here in the body, whenever I want the red value, instead of referring to it as some field number, I can now simply refer to it by that label, that key that I've associated with it. So red can be red, green can be green, blue can be blue, and that will make that all a little bit easier, I hope. Here where I need the actual field's name, I can actually refer to it as field's name, and that should work just fine. If I jump back over to my browser now, there, now it looks like everything is showing up just the way it was. Alright, with that basic change made, what we now have is we have an easier way to be able to refer to the different elements of our color when we're actually displaying them in our file. That also means that we now have that ID value which is available. So here where I've typed in the XX where the ID is actually supposed to go, what I could do in there instead is I could put in the actual ID color. I'll just echo from fields element ID, and that should drop in the actual ID for that individual color. In the browser, if we take a look and refresh, if I actually look at the code that's being generated here, what happens with each one of my different show links is I'm getting the ID for that particular color. So Billy's Chino's color here is showing up with ID 1, Rattlesnake here is showing up with ID 2, Tempe Gold is showing up with ID 3. So it looks like that's working out pretty well. When I actually click on one of those colors, if I click on the chinos color, it takes me over to the show page, which I still don't have any code in, but importantly, now up at the top in the address bar, I do have an ID get parameter, which the show page will then be able to use to determine what color it is it's actually supposed to show. So let's jump over to the show page and see if we can get that part of it working. So here on my show page, let me go ahead and start by dropping in a PHP block up here at the top. And what I essentially need to do up here is I need to pull in the values for the particular color that we're supposed to show. In order to do that, I of course have to have an ID color, so I might actually want to start by making sure that there actually is a value, an ID value available to us. Let me start by saying if is set get ID. So if we actually have an ID to work with, then we'll go ahead here and work with it. If we don't have an ID to work with, then there's going to be a problem. No ID, which we'll have to address here at some point. As far as loading the actual data from the file then, I kind of hate to write that again from scratch since that's something that we've already done over here on the index page. So even though it makes my skin crawl just a tiny little bit to do it, how about if I go ahead and copy and paste the code that I already have on my index page and use that same code in order to be able to load the data on my show page. With that available, what we could then do is we could write a loop that goes through the colors array and looks for the color that has the actual ID that was passed to this page. There is, though, maybe another way that I could do that a little bit nicer, and that's what if down here, instead of simply pushing the colors in the order that they were read, what if I instead actually stored the colors into the colors array based on what ID they have? Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking into my colors array, what I could do is into a field that's designated by the colors ID, I'll simply assign to that element of the array this particular color, the array containing all the data about that particular color. The end effect of that should be that when this is finished, my colors array in element 1 will have the color that has an ID of 1. In element 20, it will have the color whose ID is 20. The benefit of that is that it should then make it very easy for me to be able to pull out the individual colors that I want. So I could do something along the lines of just saying, let me create a variable up here at the top. I'll say for the color that this page is supposed to work with, I'll start it off maybe with just a null value. What I could do is down after the colors have all been read, I could say into that color in a slightly different scope than what I had this selected as. But actually, you know, I'm thinking I should change my mind about that. Having two things called color here are maybe not the best idea in the world. So let me call this one the selected color. Same change here, selected color. That way there won't be any confusion between the color that's been selected and the color that's being built when it's being read from the file. Here for the selected color, what I could do is I could just say go to my colors array and give me back the color from the colors array whose ID is the ID that was passed to this page as a GET request. So if this page is sent an ID GET parameter of 5, that will go to element 5 of my colors array, which should be the color that has an ID of 5, which will then be pulled out and put here into selected color. Let's give it a try and see if it works. Let's start off here real simply. What I'll do up here is in the title of my page, I want to put the actual name of the color here as part of the page's title. So let me try doing echo selected color name. Let's go refresh the page and see in the browser and see if that works. It sure does. The actual title of my page is now Colors Billy's Chinos. So it looks like we're getting the color selected. If I jump back over to my home page and I click on a different color, let's click on Blue Jay Blue. Blue Jay Blue is what shows up there as the title. So since we are getting the proper selected color at this point, we should be able to pretty easily come down and finish off the body of this page. Let me start off down here. I have again some CSS created, so I'm going to create a div. I'm going to call it swatch, color swatch is what I'm thinking. Inside that I'm going to put in a span, and in that span I want to put in the actual CSS to change the background to the color itself. So I'm going to need to put the actual color code together right here, which will be a little bit messy, but we can do it. We can say echo from the selected color its red value, and then I'll append to that. I'm going to do a little copying and pasting. I'll append to that its green color, and then I'll append to that its blue color. So that should set the background properly. Let me jump over to the browser and see how that looks. Yeah, there we go. That's Blue Jay Blue for you. Next, let me put an H1 in here. Here, let's display the actual color's name in the browser. Looks good. All right, after that, let me put in a paragraph. In this paragraph, I'd like to put in the edit and destroy links like I had over on my main page. Again, we haven't written those pages yet, so I'm just going to set them up sort of as dummy links for the moment, links that don't really go anywhere. There those two are, and in the browser, they look okay. And then finally, let me put in one last hyperlink. This last hyperlink, let's just make this a link to go back home again, which is a page I called index.php. I'm going to have it just say back. There we are. So here's my show page. I click back, it takes me back to home. If I click on Rattlesnake, I see the detail page for Rattlesnake. The ID 2 was passed. The show page loaded all the colors from the file. It then found this one particular color based on its ID and built this page to show it to us. If I go back, maybe I'll click on Phoenix Evening. It looks like it's working just fine at this point. No serious issues. There is at least one little hole that I've left in what's actually going on here, and there's probably more than that, and that's that we haven't yet dealt with the problem of what do we do when if this page is ever reached without an ID. At the moment, it's actually going to cause lots of errors, because if we don't have an ID, we're going to end up with selected color being set to null, and when we then try to use selected color down in the body, everything's going to fall apart pretty badly. Well, since that's still a problem, let's go ahead and see if we can address it. It's actually not all that terrible of a thing to deal with. Really, the ideal behavior, I would say right here, is to go ahead and just redirect the user to a different page. If they've come to the show page and they don't have the information they need for the show page to be able to do what it's meant to do, then there's really no point in them being here. So I would like to redirect them to a different page. In PHP, I can effect a redirection by using a function called header. Essentially, the way it works is I call the header function and I pass it a string that starts off with location : and then I tell it a URL that I want the user to be redirected to. The header function, even though it does do redirection, does not actually cause the page to stop executing. So most of the time, after you execute a header call, you then want to execute an exit to make sure that we cut off everything right there and the user doesn't, or the script doesn't go on and do anything else. We basically just send the message to the user telling them that they're at the wrong page. Now, how this header function works is a bit important. What actually happens with this header function is that what we're asking PHP to do is to insert into the headers of the response that are going to be sent to the user this little bit of information, in this case location index.php, which in browser terms means go to index.php. So if you think about what happens when the user clicks on a show link on the home page, on the index page, they're brought to this page. At that point, the browser starts executing this show script. The show script discovers maybe at that point that there is no ID available, so that's when it then comes down here. What happens then is no data, nothing at all has been sent back to the browser yet at that point. So what I do is I say, before or included in that data that you're going to send back as part of the headers, include this message telling the user's browser that they're in the wrong place, and then I say exit. Once I say exit, that lets the PHP server know this script is done, go ahead and send the output. So essentially what happens is the server then sends back to the client an empty response that only has headers in it, and the headers that it include this little bit telling the user's browser, go to this other page. So when that's received by the user's browser, their browser then automatically makes a new GET request and requests index.php. So from the user's point of view, the next thing they actually see pop up is the index page. They've just magically ended up back at the index page again. But what's actually happened is there has been a series of several requests and responses that have gone back and forth, actually leading them to this. The most important thing with this header function call is to make sure that you do not send any data back to the client before the header call. That means no echo statements before you execute the header function. It means no HTML code outside of PHP tags. It even means you can't even have a blank line up here at the top. Now, that can be a little bit tricky. It can be a sticky point because some servers will deal with it. Some servers will not complain if output has already been sent before the header call occurs, but a lot of servers will. So it's always just the best habit to be in to make sure that whenever you're going to use the header function, you make sure that that is the very first piece of output and the very last piece of output that your script actually produces. That, pretty much as anything, is the reason that PHP scripts are often written this particular way, in this style, where the main processing that the PHP does often is put at the very top of the file before the actual HTML code is reached. Now, of course, PHP lets us put its code anywhere. If I had put it after the doc type or in the head section or anywhere further below, technically the PHP would have still worked, but on some servers I would have then had an issue anytime I needed to use this header function. So, important to make sure that that header function is the first output that's given and the last. Let's see if it actually works. If I jump back over to my browser and I click on one of my colors, I still go to the show page. Everything looks like it's fine. We can try one more just to be thorough. Everything looks really good so far. All right, so what happens if I actually do go to the show page and I don't have an ID? Well, I could simulate that by coming up to the address bar on the show page and erasing the ID. If I'm here at the show page and there's no ID and I hit enter, that's what actually happens. It just sends me what seems to be almost immediately back to the index page. In actuality, what happened was, of course, a response was sent back to the browser. The response told the browser to make a new request. The browser made that request. That request was fulfilled. That response was sent back. And then I actually saw the index page appear. It's amazing it all happens as fast and smooth as it does. And it's nice that it works that way from the user's point of view, but from our point of view, it's of course always important to remember what's actually going on here. So that gives us the opportunity to be able to redirect the user and handle some of these sorts of problems, like in this case, what happens if the user gets to the show page with no ID. That does pretty much finish off the show page. There's a few other things we might potentially add, like what if there is an ID but the ID isn't real? Those are things that could be filled in pretty well. They're pretty easily. They're just the same basic thing that we've been working with here all along.